Have you ever heard of a town that tried to disappear? Not just fade away, but actively erase itself from existence. It sounds like something out of a novel, a place so haunted it decides to become a ghost. But this isn't fiction. This is the story of a real town that vanished from maps, a community that chose oblivion. Welcome to Times Beach, Missouri, a place that, for a brief, shining moment in the 1920s, was advertised as the perfect weekend getaway for the working families of St. Louis. Just a short drive away, nestled along the Merrimack River, it promised clean air, charming cottages, and a break from the city smog. For decades, it was just that, a quiet, close-knit community. But paradise had a hidden price, one that would eventually demand the town's very soul. The story of its disappearance begins not with a bang, but with dust. The town's roads, all 23 miles of them, were unpaved. In the dry summer months, dust was more than an annoyance. It was a constant, choking cloud. So, in the early 1970s, the town of Times Beach did what many other Missouri communities did. They hired a local waste oil hauler to spray the roads. It was a cheap and effective way to keep the dust down. The man they hired was Russell Bliss. Between 1972 and 1976, Bliss sprayed the dusty roads of Times Beach with used oil from a tank truck. The residents were grateful. The dust settled. Life went on. No one knew that the oil Bliss was spraying was mixed with something else, a toxic industrial waste, byproduct from a chemical plant that had once produced Agent Orange. The secret ingredient was dioxin, one of the most potent carcinogens known to science. For years, the poison silently seeped into the soil, into the ground people walked on, the yards where children played, and the gardens where families grew their food. Life in Times Beach continued its peaceful rhythm, completely unaware of the invisible threat beneath their feet. But the first signs of trouble had already appeared elsewhere. In 1971, at a horse arena, also sprayed by Russell Bliss, dozens of horses began to get sick and die. Birds dropped from the rafters. The arena owner's own daughters became mysteriously ill. It took years of investigation, but eventually the cause was traced back to the waste oil and its deadly cargo of dioxin. This discovery set off a chain reaction. Investigators began tracking every site Russell Bliss had sprayed. The trail led them through a web of farms, businesses, and residential areas across Missouri. And then it led them to Times Beach. In late 1982, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, arrived to take soil samples. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as the town was waiting for the results, a historic flood submerged Times Beach. The Merrimack River, the very feature that gave the town its idyllic charm, rose to devastating levels, washing through every home, every street, and every yard. When the floodwaters receded, they left behind a thick, foul-smelling mud. But the water had done something far more sinister. It had churned up the soil, spreading the dioxin everywhere. The results from the EPA tests came back shortly after. The levels of dioxin were not just high. They were astronomical, in some places over 300 times the level considered safe. The town was no longer just flooded. It was contaminated on a catastrophic scale. Panic set in. The CDC issued a stark warning. Times Beach was unsafe for human habitation. Imagine receiving that news. Your home, your memories, the very ground you stand on is poison. The government recommended a total evacuation. This wasn't a suggestion. It was an order to abandon your life. In February 1983, the federal government announced a bailout. They would purchase every single home and business in Times Beach for 100 cents on the dollar, a total of $33 million. It was an unprecedented move, the first time the U.S. government had bought out an entire town due to toxic contamination. The residents were scattered. Some were relieved to escape, others heartbroken. They were environmental refugees in their own country. The community was shattered, its people dispersed to the four winds, taking with them only what they could carry and leaving the rest behind. And then the town began to disappear. An 8-foot-tall chain-link fence was erected around the entire 410 acres of Times Beach. Warning, signs were posted. Danger, hazardous waste site, do not enter. The town became a modern-day ghost town, frozen in time behind a fence. But it couldn't be left like that forever. The poison was still there. So the government began one of the largest and most complex cleanup operations in American history. They built a massive incinerator on site, a giant furnace designed to burn the poison out of the earth. For years, this incinerator ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Truckload after truckload of contaminated soil, 265,000 tons of it, was dug up and fed into the flames. The very earth of Times Beach was systematically excavated and purified by fire. The houses were all demolished, reduced to rubble, and hauled away. Every trace of the community was scraped from the landscape. By 1997, the cleanup was complete. The incinerator was dismantled. The fence came down. The land was declared safe. But what do you do with a place that has been so thoroughly erased? You can't just rebuild the homes and pretend nothing happened. The memory was too strong, the wound too deep. So, in 1999, the state of Missouri did something remarkable. They turned the site of the former town into a state park. But not just any park. They named it Route 66 State Park, a nod to the iconic highway that once ran through the town. Where homes once stood, there are now picnic areas and walking trails. The old bridge over the Merrimack River still stands, a silent monument to the past. There's a visitor center housed in the old Bridgehead Inn, one of the few original buildings to survive, located on a patch of land that was never contaminated. Inside, you can find exhibits telling the story of Times Beach, the story of its life, its death, and its strange rebirth. The town of Times Beach officially voted to disincorporate in 1985. It legally ceased to exist, its name wiped from official records, its streets removed from maps. It was a community that, faced with an unbeatable enemy, chose to vanish. It's a profound story about how fragile our sense of place is, how quickly a home can become a hazard, and how memory can be all that's left of a community. Today, if you visit Route 66 State Park, you can walk through the quiet fields and forests. It's beautiful and peaceful. But if you know the story, you can't help but feel the ghosts. You're walking on land that was once a town, a place full of life and laughter that was sacrificed to contain a poison we created. Times Beach didn't just fade away. It was unmade deliberately and systematically. It's a town that tried to disappear, and in a way, it succeeded. But its story, its cautionary tale, remains a powerful reminder etched into the very landscape itself. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten history. See you next time.